This video is going to focus on doing a quick rundown of the general method. So you were first introduced to the general method back in Intro to Social Work. So for some of you, that was a couple years ago, maybe it was last year. Some of you might be in it right now. And so as the blurb on the Sakai page kind of talked about, the general method is a really widely used text, because that's kind of the name of the textbook, that's used by generalist practitioners. It's taught in a lot of social work schools. It is wonderful and it's very applicable still. There's no concerns with its content not being applicable to the current climate of social work. However, because the textbook has not been updated since I think 2001, so we're looking at 20 years, we had to do our due diligence and change textbooks. So this is actually the last cohort that will be receiving instruction on the general method specifically. Generalist practice is going to continue. It just has like a couple small changes to like the very specific steps that the general method talks about. So I'm just saying this because I know that there's some of you who might be taking HPSI concurrently with this class or even intro, and so you're going to be hearing a slightly different modification in what we actually call the general method, but it's all general practice as well. So I would actually consider this cohort the lucky ones, because it does organize it very well into 6 specific stages. This is the way I learned it. I love the general method. I like being able to have a specific name and specific stage to reference. So we are going to be utilizing this, and you'll continue to utilize the general method for the rest of your practice classes. But just know, in case you hear your peers or experience it yourself, that we did change our foundational textbook to just more of it's just a generalist practice. It doesn't actually have a method and specific stages attached to it like this does. But again, consider yourself lucky because this is way more organized, I think. All right, so reviewing the general method. If I can change my slide. Okay. You will hear this ad nauseum throughout your social work education as we talk about the general method or generalist practice. That is one of the requirements that we have of our accreditation for social work, is that we teach you skills to be able to use on different levels with all different populations. So some of the key pieces of the generalist practice is that you're looking at it from an ecological systems perspective. So if you remember this, I don't know if it gets taught. When I had intro class, we talked about peeing in the pond. So that sounds super weird. But if you have an ecosystem and someone comes in and decides to use it as their restroom, it's going to throw off the pH balance. It's going to disrupt the whole system and the flow and the stability and the status quo. And so you have to kind of look at how things impact the big picture. It's a really big piece of HPSI as well. That aligns really well with a generalist practice, because no one can be looked at as a silo. They have to look at the whole system around it. It's focused on addressing problems and having solution-focused interventions. And so that kind of ties in with the red circle. I also think this looks like a caterpillar. Is that they're always looking for strengths and always finding ways to overcome some sort of identified problem. I don't always like the word problem because it sounds kind of dire and dismal. But obviously social work exists because there's problems in the world. So we do look at the strengths and kind of what needs are, and looking at more of the positive reframes versus the negative pessimistic view. And that's something that we will practice in this class, is how to reframe into the positive, how to help a client identify strengths when there doesn't seem to be a single one present. It's a skill that is developed and learned. And honestly, again, it's one of those things that can actually help in your personal life too. If you're kind of in down in the dumps, it's a really good skill to learn how to do positive reframes and identify strengths, even in situations where there doesn't seem to be any. The multi-level approach, so this goes back to the micro, meso, macro. So micro being the individual level, meso being group level, macro being communities, and then we also throw on global. The skills that we teach in the generalist practice is able to be applied to all those different levels. So you're not just pigeonholed into working with one certain population or one specific level. You're able to kind of ebb and flow. And honestly, that goes back to some of that ecological system. Like, you can't work with an individual if you don't understand their community. If you think about working in a nursing home, the patient or the person who resides there might be your actual client, but you've got doctors, you've got nurses, you've got insurance you have to navigate. You have their families who might be their power of attorney or overly involved in their care, for better or for worse. So you have to know how to take these skills and navigate each level, even if you're solely in micro practice. The problem-solving process, that's what the general method is. The 6 stages is a problem-solving process. So it kind of works with this, like, we're looking at problems to address, we're figuring out how to utilize the client's strengths, motivation, all those fun things to help solve a problem. The next slide I like to call my squid. This kind of just breaks down a little bit more of the principles of the generalist social work perspective. I'm going to extend my screen if I can as well. I'll have to do it later. Critical thinking, questioning assumptions that you might have, looking at the facts, kind of having some reasoning behind things. We really want to be mindful of our own personal biases when we interact with clients, because it can really impact the effectiveness of the care that we provide. The Code of Ethics talks a lot about how we need to be mindful of those things. And I just think, out of respect for individuals and their own unique stories, their own unique cultures, their own unique way of seeing the world, we have to make sure that we are thinking critically and challenging some of those assumptions and biases we might come into any situation with. We talked about the ecological systems perspective in the previous slide, kind of that person and environment. We utilize the biopsychosocial spiritual assessment to look at all those different systems and different moving pieces. The generalist perspective incorporates the values and ethics of the NSAW Code of Ethics. This is one of the non-negotiables that when you become a social worker, you have to adhere to. Otherwise, you are in violation of losing, or you could lose your license. You don't mess with the Code of Ethics. It's kind of the end all be all and directs kind of how to keep yourself safe in your practice, but also keep your clients safe as well. So we will incorporate what those look like within a general practice. We at Kuiper College specifically incorporate the biblical reformed worldview because our belief is that we can't look at the world kind of like that ecological systems perspective without taking into consideration our own faith and value system. Obviously, everyone comes in with a different value system. Even within the same religious framework, we might have different ways of looking at things or higher priority on different values within our beliefs. But we incorporate this in, and the way I love to kind of look at it is social work kind of falls into that redemption and restoration piece of the biblical reformed worldview. Obviously, the world is broken, and that's a direct result of the fall. And that, unfortunately, is why social workers have jobs. And so if we're looking at the individuals and helping them find their strengths and address the issues and problems that they've identified, we're helping to bring restoration to the shalom that God intended the world to have. We look at the professional roles in the relationships and kind of how do we take our innate desire to help people, kind of that helper role, but do it in a way that's professional and safe for ourselves and for the clients. Talked about multi-level on the last slide, that generalist practice looks at all the different levels of client systems. The problem-solving method, we're going to go into detail on the next slide and kind of do a quick refresher on the 6 stages. That's going to be the primary focus of this whole course. Like, what does data collect or engagement look like? What is data collection, et cetera, and what skills do you need to do those effectively? And then let's practice those skills in class and on video. So we really know that you aren't just being able to articulate it, but you're also able to demonstrate and show competency as well. Strengths orientation, I think that's probably one of the reasons why I really love the general method, is because it's really hard to motivate somebody if you're looking at all the negative things or the bad things that they take to the table. It can feel pretty overwhelming and hopeless. Strengths can help just give even that glimmer of hope that there's something going on that they already have going on that can help change your situation for the better. And then global awareness, kind of cut off on the bottom, but that's kind of the final level. If you're looking at the multi-level dimensions, is that looking at a global scale, we're very connected now. Technology has really made us a global society, and so we're even able to use some of the skills learned within generalist perspective and practice on a global level as well. All right, next slide. 6 stages of the general method. So if we were in person right now, I would say, who remembers the 6 stages of the general method? Since we're not in class, I'm just going to go through and tell you. The very first one is engagement, followed by data collection, followed by assessment, intervention, evaluation, and termination. We follow these 6 stages regardless of our level of client. So if we're working with an individual, with groups, or with communities, we follow this 6 steps as closely as possible as we can. The thing to remember about these steps is they are not necessarily linear. There's some sequence to it, but you might have to circle back if you're at this point. If your evaluation shows that the interventions are not effective, you might need to circle back and do a reassessment to see, did we not catch all the needs, or what did we miss that was resulted in the intervention not being as effective as we wanted to. So we do follow a specific order, but you can circle back and restart the order over. So just a quick refresh on what each stage really kind of entails. Let me move myself to the least restrictive spot possible. Okay. Like I said, every stage is sequential. Each stage is based off and reflects the findings of the previous stage. Does not mean that you can't go back and restart the process, but you do have to follow the stages in order to get the most accurate and effective, accurate picture and effective course of treatment. One of the things about the general method is that it kind of is pretty logical, and we do a lot of these things already when we start new relationships. And we might not have ever named them specifically, like, oh, hey, I'm in the engagement stage with so-and-so. So it's partly inherent, but it's also going to give you name to what you do and give some validation, some of that evidence-based stuff, taking what our guts know how to do, but also naming it now and giving credibility to it, but also providing a framework that if you get stuck and not sure how to help treat a client, it gives you steps to be able to kind of reflect back on and be very intentional about implementing. So the first one is our lovely engagement. It's where you start to build trust and engage the environment of your client system. And so this is really the way to help individuals to open up to you and accept your presence, because if a client is not motivated or resistant, it's really hard to get them to get through the next stages. Once you've engaged your client system well, that's when you start to collect data. Now, you're always kind of collecting data because we're observing at all times. But if you've engaged your client well, they will reveal and share more with you. And that gives you good data and quality research to be able to go to the next stages. So once you've engaged, consistently collecting the data, that's when you kind of assess what you have collected, and then you prioritize what you want to work on. Goals can make the social problem more manageable and not feel as overwhelming. Once you have prioritized the problem and identified what you or what the client really wants to work on, that's where you give very concrete interventions to be able to measure and track progress. Micro, meso, and macro interventions can be implemented. They are direct and indirect, but the big key is to get the client on board and motivated to work on them. How do you know if they worked? Through evaluation. Kind of a no-brainer. If the identified interventions do not seem to met the goals, then you can still go back to assessment. If you feel they have, then you move to termination, where you end the relationship with the client.